This episode is presented by Mercury, the fintech that simplifies how more than 200,000 businesses operate.
Hello, and welcome back to Equity, TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. Today is Friday, October 11th. I'm Devin Coldewey, and joining me is TechCrunch senior reporter, Margaux MacColl. What's happening with you, Margaux?
Hi. The thing I'm thinking about most this week is I got my cat blessed on Sunday. We dressed up and brought him to church and held him up to the priest.
Wow. Is that a normal? Is that recommended by veterinarians?
Is that normal? That's a great question. It wasn't even we're Catholic, but it was in an Episcopalian church, and it was the prettiest one. So we wanted the cat to see a really great church.
Yeah. Well, you never know. I mean, the cat may go into the priesthood at some point, or decide to go to. Yeah. I don't know how it works.
But now we're an interfaith household. So
wow, I guess that's true.
Crazy.
Well, congratulations, and congratulations to the cat. By the way, I want to say listeners probably have noticed by now that your friend Kirsten Korosek is not kicking off today's episode. That's because she ditched us to go to Africa to climb a mountain. And so we're all jealous. Boo. But as you can tell, if you know that voice, that means we get to hang out with Anthony Ha, my old friend of many years. How's it going, Anthony?
Good. It's great to see you again, Margaux. I'm really excited to be talking to you, and I'm excited to be on Equity, which I've listened to so many times, and also especially when I was doing the original content podcast, and we were sort of like the much less not the flagship podcast, and sort of we're looking at Equity and you're like, oh, those are the cool kids. So I'm excited to be at the cool kids table.
That's it's when the host leads and we're like, all right, now we are the host. All right. Well, on the show today, we're going to get into a couple of interesting things. We got deals from OpenAI, big one, obviously, Dave Clark's new venture, and Impulse Space. And then we've got a little bit of a discussion on AI weaponry that no one wants. Or does everybody want it? That's the question. And Google's potential breakup. Before we get into all that, though, you're listening to this on Friday, but we're recording it Thursday. And Thursday night, Tesla has a crazy robotics event going on with humanoid robotics, may have a cyber cab or a cyber van, and McDonald's is involved, possibly. We're going to find that all out tonight, and Rebecca Bellon is going to talk about it later. But if you're wondering why we aren't talking about whatever hijinks Tesla got up to last night, it's not last night for us. It's last night for you and for us tomorrow. So if that makes sense, keep an eye on it. Check TechCrunch for coverage. Anyway, let's get into today's deals. I'll start since I've got the momentum. You can't interrupt me. OpenAI closes the biggest VC round of all time. Is it really that big, though? $6.6 billion. I mean, I feel like I could do that if I was, had the sole control of the world's most powerful technology. So yeah, that's billions of dollars going into OpenAI. I think this has already been kind of dissected by our coverage, other tech outlets. So I want to focus on a couple of interesting bits that were reported. OpenAI has said investors cannot back certain competitors like Anthropic, like Glean. It's kind of an interesting play. I don't know how common this is in contracts. It's probably fairly common for direct competitors, but I don't know. Is that something you hear about a lot?
No.
I think certainly at the early stage you hear about it. I don't know. I should know this. I should part of the reason, if no one needs to know this, but when I left TechCrunch, I went to work for a VC for a couple of years. And I know that it was definitely a lot of talk about you don't invest in direct competitors. But I don't know how much of that was actually in the legal language versus just you're not a good person if you do that. And people will be very upset. My sense is that at the later stages, that is kind of unusual, right?
Yeah. I mean, when the other companies are billion-dollar companies, the whole thing felt a little weird, but I genuinely do not know if it's that common. Margaux, you thought it's not quite so common?
I got the sense that it's not super common, especially, again, like Anthony was saying, at the later stages. I don't know. I mean, I cover defense tech. There are General Catalyst invested in Anduril and Helsing AI that do similar things. When you get to these big companies, I get the sense that they're balancing out.
Yeah, it kind of seems like you kind of hedge your bets. I'm an AI investor. I'm interested in these two big companies doing two slightly different things. I don't know. It felt a little weird, but of course, we don't know the actual language and so on. There's a reporting that they are also going to restructure. We know that they're going to be leaving behind their current, a not-for-profit organization or a limited profit vehicle. It's all very complicated. And now they want to become a public benefit corporation, possibly. And I was talking with a company recently that did structure as a public benefit corporation, and they admitted, like, the CEO was like, well, this is mostly signaling. It's not like we have any serious limitations. It's more so that the board has to consider the mission when making decisions, like whether to buy or sell or, do certain stuff with the company. But it's not like, OpenAI, by becoming a public benefit corporation, would actually benefit the public. Like, that's not necessarily true.
Right. It makes a difference that they're no longer a nonprofit, but the difference between a for-profit public benefit versus just a regular for-profit is not actually a huge difference.
Yeah, it sounds very different, but it isn't that different. And lastly, there was a report that information said that the OpenAI is projecting that they could lose as much as $14 billion in 2026 and not turn a profit until 2029. There's obviously very speculative numbers based on markets that basically don't exist. But just the fact that they are expecting to double or triple or quadruple losses is pretty shocking to me. Like, I thought, the losses, can the losses get much higher? Like billions and billions of dollars. You're like throwing money down the hole. They're like, we're actually hiring more people to throw more money in the hole.
That's the exciting thing about AI. That's the exciting thing about AI is you can just continue to set money on fire. There's
an unlimited amount. Margaux, that doesn't seem to shock you?
No, it does. I just don't know how you justify it when so much talent is leaving every day. What I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing. Obviously, we had the whole thing with Ilya Sutskever leaving. We had one of the co-leads of Sora left. The ChatGPT guy left. The CTO, Mira Murati, left. The head of research left. Like, who's left? It's just Sam. It's just the Sam show now. Like, Sam's a smart guy, but he can't do all these jobs, and everybody else is being hired by literally every other company on Earth. Anyway, it's strange operation. That's where we'll leave it.
It just feels like, obviously, the numbers and the amounts being invested in the valuation, like, it's hard to believe that any of that is based on sort of like a rational calculation on anything, as opposed to just, we think AI is going to be the biggest technological shift. We think OpenAI is going to be the number one company. Whatever it takes to pump money in and get a big stake in it, we will do. And we'll see if that actually pans out.
Yeah. I mean, I talked with a very bullish, one of the main guys from Altimeter, and he was like, look, ChatGPT is the single most important product to come out in the last 10 years. And it's going to go to the moon, and we are going to make that happen. And it's not going to be profitable for a long time. But when it does become profitable, it's going to become the next Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, and we're getting it on the ground floor. So anyway, that'll play out over the next decade or so. Let's move on. Margaux, you want to talk about Dave Clark's new thing?
Yes, Dave Clark is back. For context, background, he's been on quite the journey the last few years. He was CEO of Amazon's worldwide consumer division for 2 decades, and then went to be Ryan Peterson's successor at Flexport, was promptly pushed out by Ryan Peterson. And now he's raised $100 million for Augur, which is an AI-powered tool for supply chains. He's kept it pretty vague on the details. He basically just says that it's going to aggregate data and that there's going to be some chatbot element. But yeah, I mean, he's raised $100 million. So,
I mean, with that pedigree, and you have AI in the pitch, so $100 million seems like the absolute minimum for raising.
Definitely. It's a huge market. I mean, he has had a very long career. And so there's a lot of hits and misses in that career. Like, he was one of the first people at Amazon pushing for robotic automation, which was very successful. And then during the pandemic, he was pushing for more brick and mortar stores, which was bad. So big record. He was accused of mismanagement at Flexport. I don't know where the jury of public opinion is on that. There was a lot of shit thrown from both sides.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty standard. Anyone who gets kicked out of a big company, there's always more to it than the public statements and what the person says. And sometimes it's way worse than you think for one side or the other. Maybe it's a toxic company. Maybe it's a toxic leader. It's hard to know because nobody wants to get out there and burn the bridges unless there's a legal case and then it gets out there in the court filings. But, maybe it was just a personality mismatch or something. How bad can he be if someone gave him $100 million?
Yeah, I'm really stuck on the counterfactual because he briefly considered running for governor of Texas.
Wow.
And then promptly abandoned that plan.
I like that's
Imagine worlds.
Yeah, the point in your life where you choose one of two roads: to raise $100 million for AI logistics company or become the governor of Texas.
I mean, you probably need to raise nearly that much money to mount a serious run for governor of Texas, too.
Maybe it was more like a SPAC. They gave him $100 million and they were like, either start a company or That's how it works these days, I think.
We're going to start conspiracies on this podcast.
That's a great idea.
That's what podcasts are for.
Some say that it's been the idea all along. Well, I don't mind the logistics side of things. Personally, I find it kind of boring just to actually learn about the actual stuff. But as a business, it's complicated. It's really necessary. And there's a lot of data, going back many, 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 many decades, that possibly AI, which is really good at pulling signal out of noise, could make something out of. And I know that there are probably other companies already doing this, but I don't think it's crazy. Companies that sound boring often are the best companies.
I totally agree. One stat in the story that really stuck out to me was that 56% of retailers hold weeks worth of safety stock as insurance in case there is setbacks, which is so inefficient. So there must be a way to make this very complicated industry better. And maybe Dave Clark is the guy.
He's going to blow it up. Make everybody get everything right away. We did it with Amazon, but now it's going to be next minute delivery. You get it before you even know you want it.
I'm in.
I imagine we're probably going to be thinking a lot more about logistics and supply chain in the next couple of weeks, too, with the longshoremen strike. And I think that's going to be making a lot of headlines.
No, that's true. I'm hugely pro-union and pro-labor and everything. And I love when these strikes happen because it shows how much power one group can wield when they work together. And it's these people are obviously so crucial to the entire global supply chain that, if you want to try and step on them, you're going to get stepped on. I love seeing that instant karma. I mean, it's probably karma that's been building up for 6 decades, but
instant.
It's relatively instant on a geological scale. Okay, so Anthony, you want to tell us about Impulse Space? This one sounds a little more insane.
Right. So this is a company, like you said, it's called Impulse Space. It's founded by Tom Mueller, who was one of the founding employees at SpaceX and eventually became the CTO for propulsion. So they raised a $150 million Series B. And what they're trying to do is build orbital transfer vehicles. And what that means is they're basically vehicles in orbit that take a satellite that's already in orbit and move it around. And beyond the fact that it's, the SpaceX pedigree and the fact that it's $150 million, which is a pretty sizable check, although in space, it's, I guess, not as unusual. I think is that this is a company that has already recently completed its first mission. It has a second one lined up. Also, very shortly after announcing the funding, it announced a contract with the U.S. Space Force. And so it seems like a company that, at least to me, has been relatively under the radar, but this isn't something speculative years off. I mean, I'm sure the real commercial potential is, but is something that's already in the process of becoming a reality.
I think we can trust Tom Mueller because he was known as being one of the real guys at SpaceX making things happen. And so if he thinks that this is the next big thing, certainly he's got more expertise than I do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a certain aspect of just wow, sounds cool. I'm not an expert on, rockets, so I will take your word for it. But I mean, I think it's also interesting because it shows the opportunities beyond just the kind of SpaceX launches, but, companies that are then, if it's okay, we're going to have, private vehicles going up into space, doing these launches. What are the other opportunities that opens up?
I just always with these love to map out all the SpaceX connections. He was obviously a former SpaceX guy. Scott Nolan, who's the founder's fund partner, was also a big SpaceX guy. And I was literally looking at an interview with Tom Mueller last year where he said, I still feel like I'm a SpaceXer and I'm part of that company. It's a big ecosystem. A lot of money ends up going back to Elon.
I know, unfortunately. Obviously, SpaceX, hugely strong company, but I get so many pitches for space startups that are former SpaceX engineers do this. And it's getting to the point when they're former Googler does this, or ex Microsoft, whatever. And I'm do you know how many people work for these companies? I'm practically an ex Googler at this point. The amount of work I've done for them writing about their products.
I think SpaceX maybe isn't quite at that point yet, but I could see it getting there. I mean, I feel former Googler is a phrase that still has some currency, but I suppose that if we really cross-examine it, maybe it shouldn't have the weight that it does.
No, but I mean, it really is. It is different with SpaceX, though. And a lot of people, a lot of the companies I've talked to that have come out of SpaceX as startups, they're all hey, we worked there. It was great. And we just saw more potential in this part. And SpaceX is not going to make a software product, or it's not going to make, this type of satellite. And we decided we wanted to do that. And we have money, we had the connections, so we did it. I really admire that being able to leave such a big and dynamic company to go and do your own thing. I think it's great. But it just every once in a while, I'm There are tens of thousands of you. Like, not everything every one of you does is going to be significant, but I do appreciate it being mentioned.
Right. And so I should mention that I think Margaux mentioned the Founders Fund connection. And I did not, I think, say explicitly earlier that Founders Fund led the round. And then, Devin, to your point, again, there will probably be many people who are former SpaceX employees who maybe don't have a deep connection with the company. But Tom Mueller seems like somebody who absolutely can put that at the top of his resume as one of the founding employees.
Oh, yeah, certainly. I think that that's a good time to stop in the deal department. After the break, we'll be coming back to talk about AI weaponry that no one wants, and also a little bit on the Google breakup that is probably not going to happen.
So this week, I published a profile on Brandon Singh, who is the co-founder of Shield AI. It's a big defense tech startup. They create AI pilots for military uses primarily. And we got into an interesting and probably inevitable conversation about AI ethics, particularly in weapons. I asked him pretty straight up if Shield AI would ever create fully autonomous weapons. And it's complicated because there are weapons that have autonomous elements right now. But the line for a lot of human rights organizations is that humans still make the final call to pull a trigger. I asked him if they would create an AI pilot where that wasn't the case, where the AI makes the decision. He was pretty adamant that they would not. He said, Congress doesn't want that. No one wants that. I have been listening to a lot of Silicon Valley founders talk about this. I think there's a lot more open-mindedness than he portrayed. And regardless, I think it's pretty universally acknowledged that Ukraine has totally changed the playing field. One, in that it's provided a ton of combat data for the first time for a lot of these startups that got launched in the past few years. They've all rushed to Ukraine. They've all rushed to put their drones on that battlefield. It is a treasure trove of combat data. And two, they want any advantage. Like, they have pretty openly said, one official literally said, we need maximum automation. So I definitely think we're kind of in a perfect storm of AI rapid development and conflict zones where that technology is really welcomed. That, we might finally in the next few years cross that line where AI is making these decisions.
No, I agree with both sides here. I personally, I would rather not see automated hunter killers roving the battleground, but I do think that that is the direction that warfare is going. And warfare is not limited by the morality of the participants. It's limited by the technology. I think that that's going to continue with autonomous weapons. And whether we like it or not, certainly we're going to have to build things to defend against them. Whether the deployment is a moral decision, but ultimately somebody's going to have to make them. And somebody's going to make a lot of money making them too.
I think a lot of this is very scary. Thinking about it from the perspective of somebody, who just writes about startups in VC, like how we talk about AI hallucinations and other errors now. I feel like it's inevitable that there are going to be VCs and founders who use almost the exact same language to describe mistakes made when lives are lost. And I am not excited about that. But I think that's kind of where my tech reporter brain goes to, is just, it's such a different use case. And on some level, it feels inevitable. But again, I'm not saying anything that's not obvious, but just the stakes are so much higher.
When the stakes are that high, you can't put a half-baked product out there the way that really every single AI company has done and just let it sort of fix itself as you go and be like, oops, well, who knew that AI was so full of problems? Like, it's going to be full of problems on the battlefield too. And finding that out is going to be, we're only going to find it out through loss of life.
Yeah, definitely. Also, what you were saying before about, like, if we don't make it, our adversaries will. One of my favorite quotes I found through reporting this piece was there was a Russian diplomat last year during a UN AI arms conference. And he said, we understand that for many delegations, the priority is human control. For the Russian Federation, the priorities are somewhat different, which is a crazy quote.
It's crazy like a fox. You know what I mean? Like, there will probably have to be new conventions, like UN conventions, that address appropriate usage of these things. And the technology is further along, I think, than people would like to believe. And that's why we're talking about using it on actual battlefields and commercializing it.
I do want to underline that point you made about, I think often when people are sort of pitching the benefits of AI, it's often in sort of this absolute best case scenario. Mm-hmm. And so, I think it's important that as we consider these things, like, is it still worthwhile? It's still saving lives if it's way less accurate than what this tech CEO is projecting? Or is it actually not better at all?
Yeah, it has that same vibe of the head of, Microsoft AI or something like that saying like, oh, this is going to revolutionize the workplace and increase productivity by 400%. And then it doesn't do that. And you're like, okay, well, if that's a slightly different conversation than just about like having a little AI coworker.
Yeah, my frustration when I've talked to defense tech founders about this is a lot of them point to the US government for guidance, being like, well, we're not going to make it until they say they want it. The US government has put out voluntary outlines. And I believe they said that if you're going to develop these weapons, you need approval from like top military officials. But that is not a ban on developing them. That is not a ban on selling them. And this technology is not going to come out of nowhere. There's a lack of transparency right now on what private companies are working with the DoD to develop in terms of lethal autonomous weapons. There's a lack of transparency from the government on what they're explicitly looking to do. And I think by the time the public is aware of what weapons they are buying and what weapons they are deploying, these programs will have been in the work, obviously training this AI to make it very accurate, hopefully, for a long time. And that lack of transparency is what is frustrating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to have these conversations, but transparency is absolutely the most important thing here. And, if we're going to be developing them, let's do it out in the open. I mean, everybody's going to find out about it anyway. Speaking of regulation, that's kind of what we were talking about. Let's talk really quick about the Google breakup. I mean, it's not really a Google breakup. It's an antitrust case where breaking up Google's businesses in some way has been proposed by the government as a solution for what they ruled was anti-competitive behavior by Google. There's been various attempts to whack Google in various ways over the years, and none of them have really stuck. They've paid a lot of fines. Unless I'm forgetting anything, they've basically just apologized and moved on and continued being a monopoly in ads. Is that sound about right? Like, Anthony, I know you were really in ad tech pretty prominently for a long time, covered that area extensively. What's your take on this?
No, I think you're right that, certainly everything that Google has faced up until now has basically been, wrist slaps. And one of the things that was surprising to me is I'd seen all the headlines about, Google being potentially broken up. And then, when I actually started to just read about it, I realized from what I understand, there's not like a specific proposal on the table. It's just, the government saying these are the areas where we want to scale Google back. And it's possible that breaking Google up could be the solution we propose in that area. Who knows if that's actually what it's going to be. We're just obviously in a very different antitrust era than we were, I think, for most of those other things. Whether or not that momentum will continue past this presidential election, I think is definitely an open question. But it's something that I think for a long time, it seemed like it was really just not going to happen and seemed impossible. And you would see these proposals of like breaking up Google. And I would just be like, that is never going to happen. And, I think that for the first time, it seems, oh, maybe it will. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of obstacles and it would just be such a legal battle to make it happen. But it seems more likely now than it has in a really long time. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think the kinds of areas that they identify in terms of Google's power, those are areas where Google is incredibly dominant. And whether or not a breakup is the right strategy, I do think it's good that the government is focused on scaling back Google's power in those areas.
Yeah, it feels more on the table than it did before. But whether it's truly on the table or whether it's just kind of like still slipping off the table or like they just kind of put it on there and everybody's like, well, we're not actually going to do that. It does feel more realistic. We had a podcast about this in the summer about whether this case is coming too early or too late. And Rebecca talked with a lawyer about it. And it's kind of like this probably should have happened a while ago. Kind of like we're trying to undo the baking of a cake. Google has embedded itself so strongly and has integrated all these businesses and lines so deeply and is so deeply integrated with everybody else. It's hard to say, okay, let's break you up. And you got to like, okay, now I got to remove the milk and the egg from the cake and put them somewhere else. Like, it's already baked. You can't just undo that. It'll be unbelievably difficult. But if you were to look forward a couple of years as they're investing in this whole new AI ecosystem and changing their business model and like everything is topsy-turvy, maybe there's a way where in the next couple of years, the entire business is a little more amenable to saying like, Google, you cannot be involved in this side of the business. Your AI tools cannot be using your advertising tools or what have you. That kind of future looking solution rather than let's unbake the cake solution.
Yeah, Devin, I'd love to hear from you about how you think this will affect Google's like AI development. I feel like I'm seeing a lot of conversation around that and around Google not being able to use a lot of data for it. I'm curious your thoughts.
I don't know. Google's AI development is pretty weird because Gemini is kind of considered as lagging behind the others, like certainly behind OpenAI and Anthropic. It may be behind some of the open models. It doesn't really excel in anything. And I have never heard anybody say that they like it. You know, a lot of people like ChatGPT, but nobody says like, I go to Google and I use Gemini to do this. Kids aren't using it. Professors aren't using it that I know of, but it's being integrated into one of the most popular products ever in the world, Google Search, which kind of feels like they baked a cake and now they're like spraying hot sauce all over it and being like, enjoy your spicy cake. It's spicy now and you can't take the spice out of the cake.
My favorite joke my husband makes is when he Googles things, he's like, okay, there's the lying answer. And then he scrolls past it. It's like, there's the real answer.
Oh, totally. I mean, in keeping with my weird status of not using, Anthony, as you point out, Spotify or what else don't I use?
Uber.
Google. Well, I don't use anything, but I use DuckDuckGo, which even DuckDuckGo is starting to integrate like AI stuff in. And I'm like, stop. Nobody wants it. Get out of here.
No, it's cool. You get like a lie now with every.
Yeah. You get the lie out of the way. And you're like, well, that's not what I'm looking for right off the bat. Thank you. Now I can go to the real results.
Right. Well, and I would say I do like that. I've noticed that I unconsciously have started, because I was definitely like, I do not want AI in my search results. And I would make a point of scrolling past the AI answer whenever it came up. But then as I get lazier, I start to be like, well, let's just see if it concurs with a real search result below. And so the behavior changes is definitely happening. But to me, yeah, it's both that it's, there's a good chance that it's a lie and just the ease with which you can determine like, oh, is this actually reliable information? And Google does a better job than ChatGPT of at least saying, well, here's where we drew the information from so you can actually check. But in general, that push towards search results are just sort of this like magic answer that we give you. That's really scary and depressing.
Well, I think that breaking it up may end up being superfluous as the entire industry changes. And who knows what'll be the next Google. But this whole thing is going to play out over like many years. If they break up Google, it's going to be like a 5-year process. But I think that kind of turmoil and the turmoil that we're living through right now, not politically necessarily, but like with tech and AI, even if you are not interested in AI specifically, like the AI search results that suck, the fact that things are being shaken up really presents an opportunity, I think, for startups, for investors, and for consumers to try different things. Like when everybody stopped using Facebook or, everybody's leaving Twitter or whatever, you go and try different things and you find out that there's value in other types of software, networks or whatever. And that's when you start seeing like, nobody would have invested $6.6 billion in OpenAI 10 years ago because they're like, no, everybody searches for what they want on Facebook. Like it's that, and that to me is so foreign now. It's such a crazy idea, like going on Facebook at all, let alone searching for something. But like, the whole world is changing, at least in the whole tech world, I should say. Where do you think the opportunity will be over the next 5 years if Google is shooting itself in the foot?
I think there's also, I would say, less of a technological opportunity, but this weird financial incentive opportunity in that because of all this antitrust scrutiny, not just for Google, but all the big companies, is that it's so much harder for a startup to get acquired right now because, they just know the DOJ is going to be like, oh, is this anti-competitive? And so you kind of can't build to just be like, well, here's like something that Google can acquire for $50 million. Like there's a lot more pressure to like actually have a big disruptive company. And I'm sure there are VCs, I know for a fact there are many VCs who are very unhappy about that antitrust landscape, but I do think it creates a very different dynamic of instead of everything just getting hoovered up by the FANG companies, no, like you have to genuinely compete with Google or Facebook or Amazon.
I agree. I'm sorry to hear that the VCs don't like the regulatory environment, but I will love Lena Khan until I die, and no one can stop me. I wish I could go work for her at the FTC, but I probably won't. I'll just keep on doing this. Okay, I think that's all the time we have today. Thanks to Anthony and Margaux for joining us. Equity will be back next week, and you'll get Margaux to lead it, actually, I think, which will probably be a nice change. So until then, you can find Equity under the handle @EquityPod on X and Threads and wherever you get your podcasts. Take it easy.
Equity is produced by Teresa Loconsolo with editing by Kel. Bryce Durbin is our illustrator, and we'd like to give a big thanks to our audience development team and Henry Pickavet, who manages TechCrunch audio products. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.